Hi, everyone. When we talk about the English saints, we are really talking about a vast gold mine that has hardly been touched in our day and age. There are many, many wonderful English saints that really are as inspiring as anything found anywhere in the Orthodox Church. And in fact, of course, the Orthodox Church in England is very, very old, older than many of the more modern churches that we have today, and important churches like the Russian one, for instance. So it's important that we look to some of these saints, even though sometimes, because of the vagaries of the English language back then, their pronunciation can be a bit tricky. Even so, it's well worth our investigating some of these really, really wonderful saints. And so we have one on May 25th in the Holy Orthodox Church called Saint Aldhelm of Sherborne. Now, Saint Aldhelm was someone who was actually born with a rather silver spoon in his mouth. His father was someone from a royal family in Wessex in southern England. And because of this, St. Aldhelm had many, many advantages over other people at the time. He was given a brilliant education where he studied all the important things that you even hear St. Basil the Great talking about studying in Athens many years before. St. Aldhelm himself was born in the year 639, and he reposed in the year 709. But his great education was put to good use, because not only was he extremely knowledgeable about virtually anything you cared to talk about at that time, he was also a very, very pious man, and around the age 22 took monastic tonsure. And almost immediately, even at that young an age, became a leading light in the English church, with many, many people coming to him for spiritual advice. And on top of that, his miracle working was quite astounding. His life is replete with so many miracles you could hardly count them, just one after the other. Sometimes not even intentionally by him. Things just seemed to happen wherever he went. At one point, after having established probably well over 20 churches and monasteries, even as a young priest, he decided to go to Rome to see if he could get some special privileges for some of his monasteries. One of those privileges ultimately was granted, and that was one of his monasteries was able to function really outside of the episcopal setting, with the abbot being elected by the monks and not needing any other type of approval. But St. Aldhelm went and spent a lot of time in Rome, and he approached Pope St. Sergius, who was the one in Rome at the time, and spoke with him about many, many things and received very much wise instruction from him. However, at that time, there was also a child that was born that many thought perhaps was a nun who had borne the child, and that the father indeed was Pope Sergius. Well, St. Aldhelm found this most distressing, the very idea that something like this would happen, and he began wondering to think, what would Britons think about this if they heard something about it? But a great miracle occurred, for after the child was born, having been just a few weeks old, he was brought before Pope Sergius and St. Aldhelm as well, and the child actually spoke words at that young age, and declared that Pope Sergius was indeed a virgin. And so that ended the scandal and put everything to rest after that. There was another time when he was simply visiting on certain duties, and this was later in life, because even at the age of around 63, they wanted him to become a bishop, and yet he was refusing, saying no, he was too old, he didn't want to do that. But eventually he gave in after much public acclamation. And after he became a bishop, he was visiting somewhere and was preaching a sermon. And while doing that, he took his bishop's staff and stuck it in the ground. And miracle of miracles, that staff began to bloom and formed into many trees down the years, so that even today that row in that particular city is known as bishop trees. There were many, many other things that he did. He was at one time looking to buy, because he had found this out, that there was a complete Old and New Testament that was available, that he wanted to buy from sailors who had come upon it. Now, of course, even at this time, in the late 600s, in England and most places, a complete Old and New Testament was indeed a rarity. And so our good saint wanted to get his hands on it, but the sailors kind of mocked him and said, no way, they're not going to do it, and took the scriptures into the boat, and off they went out to sea when a great storm hit them. And our saint was watching from the docks as they were sailing out into this, because it came up very, very suddenly. They were quite worried about this. They thought they were going to be drowned. And they looked back at the saint standing a mile away off on the shore and saying things like, please help us, intercede for us. Because even though they were mocking him, they knew his reputation. And St. Aldhelm indeed prayed for them, and the storm subsided, and they came back to the dock and offered him the Old and New Testaments for free. However, he would not hear of it, and so he still accepted the Old and New Testaments, but paid them a very fair price. This sort of thing went on for many, many years, many, many miracles, things that he did, the influence that he had that was so great, even helping to resolve the calendar dispute that was still going on in the Celtic islands at that point in time, even though initially, of course, it had been solved at the First Council of Constantinople, but way out in Britain and in Ireland and the surrounding environs, they were still following a calendar that was quite different. Ultimately, they were persuaded to follow the calendar of the Roman and Byzantine churches, and to finally adjust their reckoning of Pascha to that. But it took many, many years. In fact, in St. Beda's History of the English Church, he talks much about this. Well, St. Aldhelm was someone who helped bring that reconciliation about. He was also a great poet. He wrote much poetry. Some of it is still extant today, and in fact, 200 years after his death, one of the kings, Alfred, at that time, was saying that there was no greater poet in all of Britain than St. Aldhelm. And so what he used to do, even to try and help convert people, he would sing some of the popular songs of the day at a popular bridge, and people would come by and they would marvel at how proficient he was in his instrumental playing and in his singing. And then once he got their attention, he would turn the lyrics to more serious subjects and thereby bring them around to the faith of Christ. So even on, his evangelization efforts were quite subtle, quite popular, and more importantly, they seem to work. He is one of the great saints of the English Church, and as I said earlier, there are many of them, and they are all worth seeking out to find out some of the wonderful things they did, especially for the people here in this country, because they are our forebears. And although modern England has turned its back on Christianity in general, it seems like, but definitely in the Orthodox faith of their fathers that helped establish that great country, even though this is happening, these saints of old are now finding a voice again. And by their prayers, may they help convert those people in the British Isles to that faith from which they sprang after so long attempting to abandon it.